totally forgot to turn off the air conditioner. Our lighting situation is horrible, but you know what? We're gonna make this work. We're gonna make it work. Yeah, we're gonna probably have to do some camera adjustments. Please hold, guys. Yeah, turn that off. Turn this off. Maybe we can make this actually work. Yeah. Just point that over here. There we go. Yeah.
You have to tighten it.
That'll work. That'll work. We're vibing. Hello, guys. Whoever's here, I probably need to scooch up a little bit. Making some last minute adjustments. Due to the fact that.
How are we looking?
Yeah, here we go. All right, welcome, whoever's watching. Hi, how you doing? I am Keelan from Formscapes, as you probably gathered due to the fact that this is my channel, and I have Jonathan Doomier and Joe hanging out. They're on their Estuary road trip.
Woo.
And are traveling cross country. And
EstuaryRoadTrip.com.
Oh yeah. Hang on, let me actually put in the thingies for that. I had them in the video description, and I had to make a new thingy, so whoops. But there you go. There's their little adventure that they're on. And yeah, I guess we're doing some kind of live stream Q&A thingy because why not? So yeah, how's it going, guys?
Welcome. Here we are. Keelan has been our epic host for a couple of days now. And yes, we're here to answer your questions.
Yeah.
Feel free to send any questions you so desire, whether they be about us or our trip or Keelan's cosmology or,
literally anything.
Yeah.
Like, what is this green stuff that I'm drinking? It's a mystery.
What is that?
Who knows?
That's strange green
So
stuff.
somebody will have to ask that question. I can't just be out here disclosing information for free. Okay, well, on that note, Mr. Jonathan, elaborate upon what your road trip adventure thing is.
Sure.
Or if either of you have any commentary on that. Tell us what's going on. What brings you to this neck of the woods?
Sure. Well, some of you may have heard about Estuary. Estuary is an organization started by Paul Vanderklay along with one other guy, Mr. John Van Donk. And it's kind of like a small group gathering meeting. There's like about 45 groups or so all around the world, mostly in the United States. And they usually meet once a month or so, just kind of local spaces, get together. Sometimes it'll be in someone's house. Sometimes it'll be in a church adjacent building or something. And it's usually, or it's 100% non-confessional, meaning that you don't have to have any particular belief system or anything. Pretty much anybody can show up, and you'll usually get Christians and secular people and New Agers and Jewish people and all sorts of stuff. And there's an event. Every once in a while, these small groups come together for a larger event. And there's one of these in August. It is in Chicago. It's called Midwestuary. You can look, you can learn more about it at midwestuary.com. Buy your tickets today. And we are going to it, Sir Joe Man and I. Hopefully Keelan as well. And yeah, so we're going around the country basically to a bunch of these small group meetings leading up to the event, trying to hype it up, get people excited, and get people thinking about IRL relating, doing things in person, here where we can touch each other. And and yeah, that's basically the pitch. Yeah, you can learn more at estuaryroadtrip.com. We've been doing some vlogs, pictures. We have donation buttons, all the 9 yards. And yeah, that's basically the pitch. Joe, you have anything to say about Estuary or road trip?
Not a whole lot.
A man of measured words. Yes.
Indeed. All right, we got some good questions now. We got the ball rolling. Turtles. I think we're all fans of turtles here. Generally one of my top 10 favorite reptiles easily.
Turtles.
Yeah, they're cool. They have shells.
We were just talking about turtle shells yesterday.
Yes.
And how they're used for the I Ching for
Yes.
some kind of divination stuff or whatever.
Yes.
What has Formscapes been up to? Mr. Formscapes was in Italy for a while. That was a whole thing. If you missed that community post, I posted some pictures. I also posted a lot more on X as well. Went out to the Pari Center of New Learning, David Pete's little thing that Alex Gomez operates these days, and gave a live presentation there, and it was super cool.
Yeah.
And it was actually a really fucking awesome experience. But anyway, I've been kind of behind on the video creation thing due to that, unfortunately. But the next video in the alleged Ever-Present Origin series is coming along. I just got to finish editing it, which I will be doing presumably as soon as these fine chaps move on to their next stage of their hero's journey. Do I like Autekra? Yeah, kind of. Autekra, as far as like IDM stuff goes, I mean, I was really into Aphex Twin when I was younger, and so like Square Pusher and Autekra were always kind of part of that little world of IDM stuff. Yeah, alleged, because it was originally supposed to just be a reboot of my original series on the Ever-Present Origin, and now it has mutated into a monstrosity with a life of its own, and I don't know what to call it anymore. So we're just calling it the alleged Ever-Present Origin series now.
Yes. To Miss Lucky, we have indeed collected some rocks. We have collected about 5 rocks, I think, probably. You know, some from various places outdoors, some from people have given us rocks.
Shared some rocks.
Yep, shared some rocks.
If you think about it, turtles are kind of like the rocks of the reptile kingdom, right? Like they fill the same ecological niche of like hard, sturdy things. Yeah,
this is a profound point.
It is really. It's there's some kind of archetypal metaphysical depth there. I'm sure of it.
What else we got?
Yeah.
The Music Act.
You know, it's kind of a shame that like with dragons, you know, they have wings and like, you know, you have all this, they're these very chimeric things, right? You have like bird-like features with talons, but they're also kind of like snakes and also kind of like bats. Why don't we see more dragons with turtle shells? I feel like that's low-hanging fruit.
Like Bowser.
Yeah,
like Bowser.
Mario
okay, yeah. See, they're the only ones to have capitalized on this. This is why Nintendo's always ahead of the game.
True.
The spiral of the spirit, perfect imperfection. So I'm trying to make a band with the work you out. I'm not entirely sure what this is saying, but it sounds like you're talking about making music that has something adjacent to do with my YouTube stuff. I think that's what you're saying. And if that is what you're saying, then great. And if it's not, then whatever you're saying, I'm sure is great. What are your spiritual experiences or mindsets or beliefs? I think spirituality is stupid and lame, and that people should just do lots of drugs. Okay, not really.
That is quite the question. We could probably spend quite a while on spiritual experiences, mindsets, and beliefs.
I promise I will give a non-facetious answer to that question, but I'm going to let Jonathan take over first.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, we could probably spend too much time on that. So maybe like pick 5 words.
5 words.
Something. You got big fan of that whole heaven and earth thing with like kind of divine light and darkness. Hello. Here are my spiritual experiences, mindsets, and beliefs. All of them at once. I don't know. You know, I think we would probably identify as Christians, but definitely not your run-of-the-mill, the type you're used to. Also into astrology and such, and spiritual experiences. I've taken psychedelics. Those were pretty big in my life. I've also had mystical experiences without psychedelics. This is too big a question. No offense, but someone else take over. I don't know.
Let's somebody asked about Waldorf education. Let's actually because spirituality, I mean, that's just a massive topic. Let's kind of zero in on Steiner and anthroposophy and all that, because I feel like, this is pretty topical, like especially with Seraphim equals fiery flying serpent. Yes, that is precisely the argument that I'm going to be making in the next installment of the alleged APO series. But yeah, my stuff, I feel like my Formscape stuff has definitely been drifting more into this kind of anthroposophical direction over the course of its lifetime, which is like 2 years and 2 months or something like that. Time flies. Time really flies. But I was talking with somebody about this recently. In fact, I've had a number of conversations in this vein recently about Steiner and the Waldorf schools and anthroposophy. And, I'll start by batting hard on this. I think that Steiner was a genius. And I think he was also a complete failure because he really wanted to begin a movement that was a kind of spiritual science. And that word science was not just a kind of it wasn't just fluff. Like, he really meant that there was a kind of scientific methodology that he was promoting. This largely had to do with the way that he was extrapolating and generalizing from Johann von Goethe's scientific works, especially his color theory and his work on plant morphogenesis. And Steiner's taking that essentially, and he's generalizing it. And this is what we see in the warmth course. It's what we see in the light course. He's trying to develop this rigorous kind of methodology for penetrating into the orphenomen, the morphogenetic fields, the spirit world, if we're just going to call a spade. But unfortunately, the issue with Steiner that I see is that I think he really got way too wrapped up in the position that he found himself in as this kind of cult leader, effectively, for a very popular movement. He had lots and lots of followers, many of whom were very wealthy patrons of his, who hung on his every word. And if you listen to a lot of the lectures that he gave for the Waldorf School and for the Anthroposophical Society, he never says, "I don't know," and that speaks volumes. I think no matter what the question was, he would come up with something. And I feel like what happened here is that Steiner wanted to be the guy with all the answers, unfortunately. And because of that, he gives a lot of answers that are vague, or that don't really give us any kind of direct way of following his thought and figuring out why he's saying certain things, right? And the anthroposophists, generally speaking, are very, very willing to just take his word on whatever he has to say. Okay, the Elohim sacrificed their etheric body to ancient Saturn in order to form the primordial physical body of man. Why? Well, because Steiner says so. Okay. and the thing is, a lot of that stuff, no matter how far out it is, I think a lot of those things can actually be reasoned through in such a way that we can actually kind of begin to pick apart what's going on here in a way that makes sense. And that's really what I'm trying to do with Formscapes. But the fact that Steiner didn't do that, he did it a bit. He did it in the warmth course, the interdisciplinary astronomy stuff, the light course. He did that, but there's also a lot where he didn't. And unfortunately, the anthroposophists, generally speaking, are not interested in picking up that torch. They're perfectly content with Steiner just telling them things and them just parroting whatever the hell he says. And I think that's really annoying. So I guess that didn't really address the Waldorf school specifically, but I'm painting with a slightly broader brush. pass that on to you
Sure.
guys. Yeah.
Do you think we have to be holding it? Maybe we could leave it.
It's going to be a lot echoier
Gotcha.
if you're not holding it. You
Hmm.
probably want to hold it.
Well, many thoughts on Steiner as well. I generally agree with pretty much everything Keelan said. I would, I'm surely you also, have lots of respect for him in certain ways. Like you see a lot of the stuff that he's done is very, it's powerful stuff, but some of the things, it just seems like he was throwing together things as it relates to Waldorf. I definitely think he was a genius in seeing how that, like, some sort of new educational system that incorporates spirituality, is probably good and such, but it's unfortunate that it's been kind of taken by the woke ideology is how I've heard it described. I'm not sure how true that is.
I've heard that too. I've heard Douglas Gabriel talking about that,
Yeah.
how a lot of the Waldorf stuff has been taken over by this kind of woke political correctness, whatever the hell we're calling it these days. And that is alarming.
Yeah, that kind of fits with that idea that anthroposophists sometimes fall into just kind of mimicking the words of the teacher rather than kind of advancing and doing their own things, which synergize with the work of Steiner and maybe further in certain ways and such. So, insofar as maybe they could be updating it and such. Also, the Luciferic connection, as I think wokeism goes with Luciferic and cult leaders, or I don't know, maybe that's more so Ahrimanic and domineering, but the kind of egoism of like, I'm the guy and here's the I have the magic words for the cult and such. I love Steiner. I feel a very deep resonance with him, particularly on Eurythmy, which was thing he was involved in the I won't give the whole Eurythmy spiel. If you're curious about it, go to my my YouTube channel. I've talked about it and made clips about it extensively, but Waldorf could have been, I feel like there's so much potential for like new school systems, and such like that, stuff like that. Incorporating, and you see it in some schools. Like I'm reminded of Ralston College, who is kind of trying to get the Platonic, like the more traditional academy style going, where they have like, it's more so, I don't know, but we've come so far from the trivium, where it's, music and astronomy, and, it would be so cool to, I don't know if we want to talk about, how the Elohim were donating their etheric body and stuff like to the children and stuff, but it would be cool to, get some astronomy in there, some music theory and such. Yeah.
Well,
Joe, man?
Yeah, let's let Joe talk first. You got anything to comment in here?
I've listened to quite a few Steiner lectures on YouTube, and I'm a pretty big fan, but also agree with most of those things you guys said. And anyone interested in Steiner should check out where you interviewed, I'm forgetting the guy's name.
Dale.
Dale Brunsvold. Yeah.
That was an awesome interview.
Fun conversation.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
And the one with Gigi too. I talked to Gigi Young as well. That was a really cool conversation.
Yeah. I saw some other questions here. This guy says he spotted us at a local breakfast spot recently. Perhaps he's the guy who generously paid for our meal at Waffle House.
That'd be
wild.
Yeah, dude. So I don't know if you're just making that up, or maybe you just know that I like breakfast, but that's pretty cool. I think I saw another question just above that one that you were just looking at there. Real question: what is the reception of Jung in the room? Big fan of Jung. I think he also has similar flaws to Steiner in certain ways.
Yeah.
Also slightly different, but generally speaking, like very similar in certain ways to Steiner. It's kind of, they were around at the same time period, interestingly, and I would say the main distinction is that Jung kind of leaned more into the scientific, secular, kind of psychological angle, and he kind of had to hide his esoteric and kind of spiritual interests and stuff. So a lot of times he may appear as kind of too secular, but then especially towards the end of his life, when you get like the Red Book and Ion and stuff, like it becomes very obvious that he is a spiritual thinker and stuff, and is working deeply with the Christ story. And of course he talks about Aquarius, and I don't necessarily agree with all of his conclusions, of course. Like, I think the distinction suggested by Griffin or Galahad about the two fish of Pisces being, as opposed to Christ and Antichrist, being Lucifer and Yaldabaoth, I think which of course fits with Steiner very well. So big fan of Jung, generally speaking. His psychology is very, of course, powerful and, profound. And yeah, the personal myth, all that it's very interesting.
I believe Jung did mention Steiner in some of his personal correspondences, if I'm not mistaken. I believe he basically wrote Steiner off as kind of a kook, though. I believe.
Just like Steiner wrote Jung off as kind of like a secular psychologist,
Right. Yeah, I think that was a major mistake on both of their parts. I think Jung absolutely should have taken Steiner seriously, and I think Steiner should have taken Jung seriously. And honestly, I mean, both of those guys had gigantic egos, and
could be us.
Oh, listen. Okay, if Jung and Steiner, yeah, those are both like type 1s, like significantly better people than me. If they got like mesmerism and prestige, like I don't. If I get to become anything other than a C tier, it's over. I'm just like, it's definitely gonna go to my head. I'm just warning everyone in advance. Thoughts on the magnetic pole shift? My thoughts on the magnetic pole shift and every other apocalyptic thing that people talk about online is that I believe that we have absolutely not the slightest clue how the interior of the earth actually operates, and basically all of those predictions are just not worth worrying about, frankly. It's all just speculation. Just like tune it out. It's fine. Like the earth, the world might end tomorrow, but like probably not. So don't worry about it. It's fine.
Well, as you know, I put a little bit more credit in some of the theories and such about
geomagnetic activity and solar flares and such, the possibility of these types of things. Of course, we don't want to worry about it, and I agree with Keelan's point that a lot of it is kind of perhaps kind of not really super deep science. I don't know how you would phrase it. Like that it's speculative to some extent.
Well, here's a neat thing since we're on this topic is with Steiner, I talk some mad shit about Steiner because there are things about him that really irk me, and I feel like he could have done a lot better. But the guy was right a lot in very surprising ways, and usually he's right in ways where I'm just like, how the hell did he know that? There's this one bit in one of his discussions where he's talking about he's talking about geological and volcanic activity. And he's talking about this weird phenomena. Apparently, this is a thing. I have not verified this, but apparently in Pompeii, I think there's this there's this volcanic area where you can take a piece of paper, and if you light the paper on fire, above the ground, smoke will rise out of the ground, kind of drawn up by the fire, it would seem. And he was using that example to illustrate this idea that all of the volcanic activity of the earth is actually being drawn from the earth by these kind of celestial phenomena. And you see something very similar in electric universe theory, right? The electric universe guys talk about these statistical correlations that they found between the activity of the sun and volcanic activity. And it seems like he was completely right about this. Another weird thing he was right about, he talks about the moon, that it is kind of like an eggshell, that it's denser on the outside and the interior is less dense. And then you get these things coming from contemporary science saying that the moon rings like a bell, which also points towards that more density on the outside, less dense on the inside. And it's like, well, how did he know that? And yeah. I mean, he definitely had that capacity. He could see things. There's experience for YouTube chats now. Nice.
Also, I would say that a lot of times Steiner speaks in kind of almost like mythological or like symbolic almost language. Like the one that comes to mind is he talks about the moon beings. The moon beings, all right? And, you know, you hear Steiner talking about the moon beings, you're like, this guy's freaking crazy, right? But there's a way in like, you could almost, also it's translated from German, you know, we have to remember that. And the moon beings, like you can kind of think about them as moon forces, where it's like the energies, as it were. Like you can, just as we think with astrology, that kind of the moon has an astrological influence, even though it might not work through causal influence. Anyway, just to say that a lot of times Steiner is, you know, you kind of have to read through the lines of it as to what he might actually be meaning, which can be hard when he uses all these crazy terminologies and such. But as it relates to the pole shift and such, I suppose an esoteric thing I could say about that is that it kind of fits with like, you know, the symbolism of the sun, right? Where we have this kind of imposing, just as you've talked about with the astrochromogram, where the sun has both consonants, you know, its warmth and wanting, but also there is the dissonance where, you know, the sun can burn and the sun can destroy. And, you know, I think this is the symbolism of the solar logos, you know, the judgment of God. You know, I think that the material world is the manifest will of God, as it were, or something like that, such that, like, you know, the solar system is kind of a, as we go, and also the galaxy is kind of like this microcosm in a way, or this icon of the divine, and this idea that the organizing principle can affect a change in the cosmos. You know, I don't know if I would go so far as to say that like we start being dumb and the sun is like, stop doing that, here's a solar flare. That's a bit much for my taste, you know, but I definitely think there is some sort of like repetitive dissonance and repetitive cyclical constraints and challenges, just like how you need wind on a tree for the tree to go strong. You know, if the earth never got hit by asteroids and such, then you know, perhaps we wouldn't develop in the way that we have. And I think these are interesting things to think about. But also, we cannot worry and be too sure of our apocalyptic theories. Of course, always watch out for people who are very sure of apocalyptic theories and such. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts.
Somebody mentioned Gurdjieff. Do you guys know anything about Gurdjieff?
Not much.
Not much. Yeah, I'm not that familiar with Gurdjieff's things. I know that, yeah, supposedly the Enneagram originated with Gurdjieff, that he drew it from the Sufi schools, and it was originally this kind of like dance therapy thing, kind of like eurythmy, actually. And
the Enneagram ones.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, it wasn't originally a psychological thing at all. And then later on, these other authors started turning it into what we now know as the Enneagram.
Yeah, that is very interesting.
Yeah.
Because like it's almost like modes of being, right? It's like people kind of get canalized, I think would be the proper terminology, or kind of they end up finding themselves in a particular mode of being, right? And maybe that there are kind of archetypal modes of responding to, you know, childhood traumas, such that like people get stuck. Like I love thinking about this, that we are all kind of enacting a music at all times. And maybe in that Enneagram way of thinking about it, it's like, you know, this is a certain modality or like tone of music, as it were, or something like that, you know? And then, you know, we have the deeper inner child music, or like the stressed version of our mode. That's interesting. You know, I don't like the whole psychological types thing, you know, but to think about it as kind of this mode that is more transient, because, you know, people can change their mode of expression as well, you know? I don't know. Do you think people can change, like people's Enneagram types are 100% fixed as well? It's pretty, they seem, because it's really based on those super core deep down traumas, which are it's kind of just set.
It feels to me that the Enneagram does show us core motifs within human journeys that are pretty consistent throughout people's lives. And there's certain patterns within the Enneagram that we can see about how different types relate to one another. And one of the main dynamics within the Enneagram that I've been fixated upon very recently for a number of very personal reasons is the relationship between the Enneatype 4 and the Enneatype 1. And this is something that we actually see throughout the history of philosophy as well, I believe. Jung and Steiner were both type 1s. Schopenhauer was a type 1. Nietzsche was a type 4. Keelan is a type 4. And the type 1, type 4 dynamic is, man, it's messy. It's messy, but it cuts really deep into things. The Enneagram theorist Richard Rohr, in his lectures on YouTube, you can look these up, where he talks about the different Enneatypes. He says that the most fundamental thing about the Enneatype 4 is a primordial encounter with darkness. And I watched those lectures years ago, and when I heard him say that, I just knew he was right. Like, it was just like on a gut level, I was just like, yep, that's how it works. And I had no idea why it was true or what he even meant by that. But I was just like, yes, that is absolutely correct. I just no. Jung isn't a 5-wing 4? No, I don't think so. If you read Memories, Dreams, Reflections, you can see, I think very clearly that Carl Jung had this type 1 fixation upon this sense of rightness or goodness or purity. And that is the core fixation of the type 1. And that's where you get this type 1, type 4 dynamic. The 1-4 polarity is very much like the polarity of form and formlessness, the ideal and then the darkness, right? Type 4s, like with Nietzsche, for example. Nietzsche, his father represented a kind of type 1 for Nietzsche, because Nietzsche's father was just a paragon of a man, as Nietzsche saw him anyway. And he died when Nietzsche was, Friedrich Nietzsche was I believe 5 years old, very young. It was very traumatizing for him. And really, you can see that the entire rest of his life was based upon the loss of his father, that there was this higher ideal that he felt he couldn't bring himself into accordance with. And so there was this need to find a different kind of ideal, a kind of aesthetic ideal. Not aesthetic, but aesthetic, right? Art, tragedy, beauty that can redeem fallenness, right? And so the type 4 is obsessed with darkness, with redemption of pain through tragedy. That's the whole core complex of the type 4, because the inner child of the type 4 is the type 1. The inner child of the type 1 is the type 7. And so anyway, the type 1, though, is their vice is this kind of sterilization, where they have this ideal that they have difficulty reconciling with the real because of the messiness of it. The fallenness of the type 1 is disillusionment, looking at a world that can never accord with what they feel it should be, and they fall into this kind of morose, kind of Gothic pessimism, which is exactly what you see in Schopenhauer, right? It's what you see in Jung too, in his darker moments, I would say. Steiner never really fell into that. Steiner was always, or it didn't seem like he did anyway, but what happens then is the disillusioned type 1 then starts looking to the type 4, because the type 4 has kind of made that sense of darkness and disillusionment into a kind of art form. And so the type 1 becomes obsessed with the type 4 for that reason. And then the type 4 becomes obsessed with type 1 because they're looking for some kind of ideal to believe in. And so this is why Nietzsche was obsessed with Schopenhauer in his early 20s. That's why I was obsessed with Nietzsche in my early 20s. It creates these back and forths, and it's usually very destructive. Anyway, so that whole rant is just to say that, I mean, that's just penetrating into one particular duality within the Enneagram. And that's just one that I can talk about because I know it personally, because I've lived it. And there's a lot more there that could be unpacked.
That was, yes, a little bit of thread keeping. That was from the Gurdjieff. That's very interesting. It's very interesting that Gurdjieff, I've heard murmurings about him, but it's cool to hear that there's an Enneagram connection there as well. I wanted to go back to, I saw a question earlier about Valentin Tomberg, and I just wanted to do a little shill for Valentin Tomberg real quick because I think he's very cool. He was an anthroposophist who eventually left, and as we were talking about how sometimes people get stuck in this kind of just repeating the words of the master even after he's gone and stuff, Valentin Tomberg chose to further the work and kind of begin doing his own teachings of sorts, or not in like I'm gonna surpass him way, but just in that natural way. And a big thing was that he then rejoined the Catholic Church, which is interesting because it's bringing this anthroposophical kind of spiritual hermetic thinking and such and concepts, and trying to merge it with the more dogmatic traditional faith. And I think that that's very cool, kind of bridging these worlds, as it were. And he's probably most known for his book Meditations on the Tarot, which is this epic tome of theological and kind of magical hermetic writing about, which kind of uses the majors of the tarot as starting points, and would highly recommend a couple concepts that really stand out. The open circle he talks about in letter 10, which is the one on the Wheel of Fortune, which has to do with kind of the closed world of the serpent and the Ouroboros, as it were, and the world that is cut off from grace and the communion with God, and how the disposition of the virginal disposition of Mary, to be like Mary, insofar as we are perhaps called to emulate Mary as well, is what kind of creates that integral alignment that then allows grace to occur, the logos to be seated in you. I think, and various other things. He says some great stuff in that book. So interesting stuff there for sure. Yes. Keelan is doing some Googling here.
I'm pulling up this. No, I don't want to save it. I want to copy the link to
the share button to the playlist.
I was trying to share the whole playlist, but it's being
if you click on the title, you can.
Yeah, here, just start with this and find the other ones. It's that you'll find them. There's many hours of this lecture series that he does on the Enneagram, and it's absolutely eye-opening in lots of ways. Highly recommend it. And he's a very good presenter too. Listening to him talk about this is not like, watching paint dry, as some lecturers tend to be.
I want to chime in super quick. I have not seen the recent stuff about the Shroud of Turin. I saw somebody ask that. I would be curious to hear what that is, because I find the Shroud of Turin interesting. I haven't looked into it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Not really. I've heard.
It's pretty crazy. It's like,
there's some crazy stuff about it. I know there's been a lot of studies done on it, trying to debunk it. And from what I understand, those have just illustrated that it's very, very strange. So whatever it is, it's an anomaly, evidently.
Yeah, it seems like that there was maybe some sort of light, like radiation coming from the corpse, as it were, and it like impressed this like microwave / radio wave like image onto the thing, and that which kind of connects to the whole thing about transfiguration. But it's certainly a lot to think about. I don't know what's going on there, but yeah, that's all. Matches orthodox icons. And then there was a question about New Thought. Do you know anything about New Thought?
I don't even know what that is. New
I
Thought.
don't either, but it's like a whole spiritual movement of sorts, and they have like meetings and such. And one of the people who we visited on our road trip, thank you for the 777.
Thank you for your hard-earned money, Alex's brain.
Thank you. Yeah, New Thought. It's apparently like a whole another spiritual worldview that I'm unfamiliar with. But what was it connected to? Do you remember anything about it?
We've definitely come across it, but I still don't quite understand.
Yeah, I don't know what's going there. So sadly, no, we do not have things to say about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of kind of neo-spiritualistic type movements coming out of the woodwork right now. I am skeptical of many of them. I'm particularly skeptical of a lot of these kind of, let's say, consciousness first interpretations of reality, which you would think I would have a positive, opinion of, because I also think that consciousness is fundamental to reality. In fact, I dare say they're just about synonymous. But very often what you get from a lot of these guys, and you get this from Donald Hoffman, you get this from who else? Thomas Campbell. They'll say things like, yes, your experience of reality is just a heads-up display. Reality is not locally real, whatever the fuck that's supposed to mean. That reality is virtual, that it's all a simulation. This idea that really it's Kantianism is what it is. It's this idea that our concrete, tangible experience of the world isn't actually getting at the world itself, because our consciousness effectively amounts to this kind of screen which forever bars us from anything truly real. I think this is an extremely dangerous and self-sabotaging way of thinking about our relationship to reality. And so I would shy away from anybody who leans into that kind of rhetoric. I think that our capacity to really make contact with the really real world is contingent upon our capacity to take our first person experience very seriously. Empiricism is the thing that's important here. That's what,
Another thing that comes to mind is the symbolic, if I may, is the symbolic / iconic worldview promoted by Jonathan Peugeot. Insofar as there is a sense which we would probably both say, I would imagine, not to speak for you, Keelan, but that to some degree we usually are not in full contact with reality. Like we do kind of see through our own filters and lenses and such. The brain is evolved for survival, not solely apprehension of reality, as it were. But I do think we're kind of moving in that direction. And I would say that a problem with kind of symbolism, which is often misconstrued, I think people talk about signs and symbols, or signs are like signifiers, whereas symbols kind of instantiate the very essence of the kind of that which they point to, as it were. So that like in every cup, I can see cupness, right? And this is the apprehension of the spiritual. It's like in the behavior of those around me, I can perceive spiritual archetypes, as it were, and that we can contact the deeper realities which are at hand. The kingdom is at hand, but it's not. Yeah, and that the spiritual is not somewhere else. It's not. You've talked about Goethe's cave. I think that's relevant here. It's like insofar as we can, it's the spiritual is not somewhere else. It's kind of encoded in that which is here already, as it were. We just kind of have to flip the dial and vibe a little better. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, the Goethe's cave thing. I think that's a useful way of thinking about this. It's that our experience of reality, we should not be thinking of our consciousness as a barrier between ourselves and the noumenal. The noumenal is the interiority of the world, the way that Gebser talks about this, that our capacity to perceive spirit as a capacity to kind of see through the phenomenal and into, what Goethe would call the orphenomenal, which is precisely a matter of,
or the archetypal is maybe another way, right?
The archetypal, the morphogenetic. I mean, we could use all kinds of terminology here for it, but it's, the etheric, the astral. These are the insides, that which is present within experience. The manifest is the activity of the unmanifest, and the unmanifest is the patternicity which conditions manifestation. So there again, it's like the toroid is a great illustration here, like two poles of a magnet, right? You can't have a disembodied north pole and south pole of a magnet there. It's two sides of the same coin, right? Are you familiar with the publications by Charles W. Littlefield titled Man, Mineral, and Masters? No, I have never heard of that. But in any case,
maybe an example would be like it's kind of like how we even use it in commonplace English when we call somebody martial, like we talk about martial law or somebody being a martial artist. It's that they're kind of an artist of the Mars archetype is a way you could think about it, where when somebody gets real angry, it's like you can see kind of in their behavior this larger archetype, which is kind of being the manifest is kind of the activity of this archetype, and you could think about it as they're being possessed by Mars or something like that, But also we can have an intentional relationship with these archetypes, such that like if I know, it helps to be able to see them in these ways, but also like maybe if I realize that I'm kind of that all these various archetypes work through me, then I can relate with them more properly and such. Excuse me. Yeah. So yeah, stuff like that. Someone asked about psychedelics. That's of course a big topic as well, but perhaps this is a good place to show our YouTube channel. On our road trip, the last episode, which we posted, talked about psychedelics a bunch. I would say like the 2-minute pitch is that I kind of conceive them as Luciferic in a sense, like they take you off into the spiritual and like, they open the circle as opposed to like, it's hard to talk about, but basically it's that, it could, you could go too far in that kind of, altering or permutating the natural expression of the body, because that's what kind of pharmacon, that's the symbolism of it. It's like this technical magical act, but at the same time I wouldn't be here without psychedelics. Like I have tons of respect. I think, oh my gosh, that maybe it's super important that people do them with a spiritual worldview or framework or intention of sorts, because if you all of a sudden are encountering spiritual phenomena or beings or whatever have you, what archetypes or whatever, and you have no framework for it, it can be a little stressful. So it's like, maybe the priests should help. I don't know. So, stuff.
So, okay. Wes Cecil, I remember way back in the day when his channel was called Cuck Philosophy. Yes, I'm familiar with his stuff. I think he changed the name of his channel a couple of different times.
I'm pretty sure you coined this idea of Goethe's cave.
Yeah, that's the next thing I was going to mention. So Goethe's cave, that was from...
There's a clip on my YouTube channel with you talking about it.
Yeah, I think that was the end of the Formscapes manifesto where I talked about that. I think anyway, the Goethe's cave is okay. All right. So you got Plato's cave, right? You're in the cave, you got the shadows on the cave wall. And then within the allegory, you go outside up to the surface world and you escape the cave. So Goethe's cave.
Maybe I could add even more framing, which is that like sometimes people accuse Plato in this regard, and maybe it is well founded to some degree, of kind of Gnosticism, of demonization of the corporeal. He's saying we have to go off somewhere else. The light of the sun is elsewhere. Maybe I'm prefacing a bit, but it's interesting to think about how I'm just going to pause there. But this idea that Plato could be conceived as Gnostics, thinking that reality is a prison, the cave, and we must escape the cave. This is our perception of the world. But there's another way of thinking about Gnosticism, which is perhaps more correct and to be eliminated by Keelan, thusly, about the distinction between Plato's cave and Goethe's cave. Yes.
So Goethe's cave, this is just kind of like a thought, not at all thought experiment. That's the wrong word, but
Allegory?
It's an allegory, an allegorical illustration of the kind of epistemology that really Steiner draws from Goethe's work, at least my interpretation of those two. And so, okay, you're in the cave, you've got shadows on the wall, and the shadow is moving. And, okay. The shadow is amorphous. You can't really tell what the shadow is. It's just like you can't make out what the thing is behind you that is casting the shadow. But then you realize that you actually have these buttons and levers and stuff. And when you press them, the shadow changes. And you start to realize eventually what's happening is that your little buttons and levers and whatnot are actually moving and rotating the object behind you that's casting the shadow. And so by being able to look at a variety of different shadows being cast by the object from different angles, you're able to then perceive the object behind you with your mind. You will be able to see what the object is because you're piecing it together. You're seeing the pattern, as it were, which is sketched out by those various shadows. And so the idea here is that this is essentially what we're doing when we engage in this kind of Goethean phenomenological naturalism. You're looking at the manifest and looking at the patterns, the way that these manifestations connect together, and the orphenomen then that reveals itself. So that's the object casting the shadow, right? And that's the really real reality. And it's not that you can't get to it because your consciousness is this barrier that forever bars you from the really real world that's actually out there, but rather that really real thing that's casting the shadows, as it were, is the inner world of other beings, other organisms, the thought forms which constitute that interiority, that morphogenetic space, if you want to call it that, the etheric, the astral. Again, we could use a dozen different kinds of languages for this kind of thing, but it's the spirit world. I mean, if we're just going to call a spade, that's what it is, right?
Yeah, the archetypal and such. And I think there's a beautiful connection to as you're talking about the orphenomenon and Goethe's kind of natural empiricism and such. I think there's a beautiful connection to your talk about music and like how this kind of empirical encountering of the natural phenomena is a sort of empathic resonance where you can kind of, come into a communion of sorts with that which you are perceiving. And there's many ways of phrasing it, but like this idea that patterning as such is a musical happening, such that music is so deep, man. It's like, music is like this so deep way of describing anything because everything is patterns to some extent. So this ability to come into relationship with the music of your surround, to vibe with the things around you in this kind of musical way is how we come to know things better. And we can see this so easily in interpersonal contexts. It's like if I take a minute to kind of accord with the music that is Keelan's being, and I can kind of see through to that which he's experiencing to some extent, right? And it's like that kind of empathic vibing. I just love it. I just thought, we're getting a little off on this question, but I don't even remember what the question was, but yeah. But I just love that connection to music. It's so good. That the archetypes are kind of like the different instruments or like the different notes of the song, the different. Yeah, it's kind of. I think that's a good way to think about it, right there. Like each
really,
of the,
if we want to just sum it up, I mean, all cognition, all experience is is the experience of musical form. I mean, that, you know, like, and this is why, again, there's so much like spiritualistic crap popping up these days, and there's so much of it that's just fucking nonsense. Like you know, you'll find these things online, for example, where people will be trying to like make these correlations between different frequencies and different colors. Like, yes, red is 440 to 480 hertz, and yellow is 380 to blah, 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 blah. No, that's not how it works, because these are relational phenomena. Color and music, like a major third, that's a kind of musical color. There is no frequency of sound that is the major third, because it is a relationship, is a harmonic relationship between two tones. And with visual color, this is what Goethe's color theory shows us, is that it's not, there is no frequency of light that is blue or green or red or anything, because it's about this boundary between light and darkness. And you can demonstrate this literally. You can just buy a prism. They're not that expensive. You look through one at a white wall, you know, you would expect it to take that white light and split it into a color spectrum, and it doesn't. You see the colors emerge at the boundary between light and darkness, because it's this mediation, it's this interpenetration of light and darkness. And really, with music, it's the exact same thing. It's just a little bit more complicated, because what you have is you have this gradient of the modes going down from Lydian, which is the brightest, down to Locrian, which is the darkest. And really all musical forms are along that gradation of more brightness, more darkness, and then how those interpenetrate with one another to create new colors. Do I consider myself a genius? No, absolutely not. I consider myself a recovering alcoholic with a YouTube channel. Colors are composites of frequencies, not frequencies themselves. Yeah, I mean, so even if the prism is splitting up the light into a gradation of frequencies, like when the light comes out of the prism, it's still just white light until there's a shadow. And then at that boundary between light and darkness, that's where the colors start to emerge, right? And so even if you've got a gradient of frequencies, which is probably what's going on, there is no red frequency. There is no blue frequency. There is no major third or perfect fifth frequency. And this is why those idiots online who are like, oh, did you know that, you know, it's really supposed to be 432 hertz. It doesn't make a damn difference. I tune my guitar by ear. My A on my guitar could be anywhere between like 400 and 480 hertz. And I can't tell the difference, because nobody can, unless you have perfect pitch, in which case, good for you, I guess. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely some truth though to this idea that these vibrations, oscillations, there's something very fundamental about that, to the way that patternicity itself comes about, and the way that harmonic relationships come about. And I think that especially with you know, if you start making these connections between color and music, and then the astrological archetypes, like what I've tried to do with the astrochromogram, you can start to see that even in our feelings of like the Jovian feeling, you know, that feeling of optimism and growth, that kind of Sagittarius energy, there is a kind of harmonic structure to that feeling. And I think with psychedelics, you find this kind of thing a lot too. Now, I'm not really into psychedelics. In fact, I have not done many at all, and I'm really just not even that interested in them, frankly. But one psychedelic that I have done, I guess this kind of counts as a psychedelic, nitrous oxide, which apparently William James was also into. Fun fact, William James said he couldn't understand Hegel until he started doing nitrous. And then that's true. Anyway, but on nitrous, I found that it's like everything becomes vibrations. Like all of your thoughts and feelings suddenly have this very tangible, like vibratory quality to them. And I found that to be something really interesting.
I had something to add to that, but I've lost it. We've got the big thoughts going now.
What do you think about trying to model color relationships? I can speak English, I promise. on harmonic sonic relations. So there's a video called The Esoteric Metaphysics of Music, which is like an hour and a half of me talking about that topic specifically. Though if you haven't seen the video Structures of the Archetypal Realm, watch that, and then watch the one called The Esoteric Metaphysics of Music. They kind of go together.
I'm trying to remember the thing I was going to add. Music, archetypal, astral. Yeah, I think I lost it.
so I think a couple of people now have asked about Bernardo Kastrup. I mean, his arguments against so-called materialism, which isn't actually materialism, it's actually anti-materialism, are good. For the most part, I think, you know, he makes a pretty good case that consciousness is fundamental, and it is, and that's great. And you know, he also seems to be pretty open to these ideas of like Rupert Sheldrake's ideas about morphogenetic fields. He also incorporates a lot of these ideas from Carl Jung and Schopenhauer into his thinking. I approve for the most part, I guess. Now, I think he has said at one point that it's kind of tautologically true that you only ever have access to your own consciousness, and that you never really access the consciousness of another person except by this kind of inference. I would actually say I disagree with that fundamentally, because I think that when we do this kind of Goethe's cave type epistemology, oh, hello, Shady. When we're doing that, when we're actually experiencing the orphenomenal, or whatever we're calling that, right? The object casting the shadows, casting the manifestations. What's really happening there is that the interiority of the other, whatever the thing is that we're studying, whether it's plants or another human being, their insides are kind of growing inside of us. And, you know, to put that in a much simpler way, that's empathy. Empathy is not just an emotional affect. It's not just an epistemological faculty. It is the epistemological faculty, because it's what actually brings us into contact with the noumenal.
Love is the way, people.
I would drop the microphone, but this is kind of expensive, so I'm gonna not. but the energy's
You
there.
have to love everything in your surroundings, and this is how you come to know God. Yeah. What else we got? I think I saw. Man, there was something that you said that I had a whole nother thing to add to it, but yeah, all that stuff. That's the good stuff right there, folks. You gotta, you know, think about that. If I humbly suggest,
Put that in your pipe and smoke it. You fucking hippies.
Yeah.
Get a job.
Speaking of that, no. Jokes aside, I'm surely you have some thoughts on psychedelics, or I don't know. We said some things when we were talking with Brandon in Pittsburgh. Check it out on estuaryroadtrip.com. But you know, maybe some more consummate thoughts, or you know, bringing it all together. Like I don't know, what would be your, you know, some words of wisdom about psychedelics? You know,
I don't know. It's
not to
tough
call
to
you-
talk about because like most people probably shouldn't play around with psychedelics. But if I don't know, if it's a recurring theme in your life and it's something that you've always been interested in, maybe you should.
True.
But also maybe not still.
Yeah, just kind of a word of caution. Be careful. You know. Yeah.
And you always have to take it slow. You can definitely overdo it, and you overdo it and you basically just lose touch with reality. So
Yeah, the danger is like this kind of, you know, getting lost in the spiritual, and like not being able to differentiate between like yourself and others to some extent. Like, right? Like maybe I feel like that's helpful stuff. Shout out to the person gifting memberships. Keelan, maybe something about that whole luciferic danger of like depersonalization, or kind of how we were talking about yesterday, how like the schizo faculty can kind of get out of hand, you know, with psychedelics. That's kind of relevant to some extent. Of course, I would also say, you know, part of me says every person should trip at least twice in their life, and another part of me says that's completely insane. So, you know, like just
I've never tripped at all, and I managed to get this crazy. So I mean, you don't need it. You can, yeah, you can do it all on your own.
Yeah, there's many experiences
Yeah.
which could be termed psychedelic, you know, like even without drugs, you know.
If you find yourself stuck in a material, secularist mind frame, then maybe you can use it to break out.
Kind of like a baptism, in a sense. Some food for thought.
Yeah. Oh man, where should I start with this? We're going to talk about the schizophrenia thing.
I think it could be interesting for people.
Well, I want to tie this into the whole like, man, I don't know if I want to tell that story though. That's a long story. Well, okay, all right. Let's put it this way.
Yeah, psychotic breaks suck.
Yeah, they do.
They happen, you know, if you have
Yeah.
one, don't beat yourself up with that.
It happens to the best of us, you know.
It'll pass.
Schizophrenia is attainable without psychedelics. Yeah. In fact, I talk about Gregory Bateson's theory of schizogenesis in the next EPO video, alleged EPO video. The thing is, you can really think of the human psyche as this kind of nested shell structure, like Matryoshka dolls, right? You got these layers that you build around the what's really the inner child, the inner infant that is there at the nucleus of one's sense of selfhood. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Robert Falconer's work with internal family systems therapy. I would highly recommend looking into that. It's as close to shamanism as you're going to get from modern kind of therapy stuff. But he's the real deal for sure.
I was gonna type response, but I could just say it. It says, is it true? Let me come back over here. Is it true that you can induce self-induced DMT-like trip without psychedelics via meditation and such? And I would say yes, like breathing exercise and such can get very psychedelic. I've not experimented too much with this, but I've also had some very psychedelic experiences without drugs.
Supposedly holotropic breathing stuff, like that Stanislav Grof developed, that can get you pretty far.
Yeah.
So I'm told. I haven't actually done that.
Also, there's people in there's some sort of spirituality in the East. I don't know what it is, and I'm not trying to throw shade at all Eastern spiritualities, but where these people basically like are inducing this like endogenous chemical or some sorts, and they have these practices where they like cut their tongue actually or something like that, and it's like these people are basically just junkies trying to get high on maybe that's a bit harsh, but yeah, there's definitely some endogenous stuff that is possible for sure. Yes, but also good to be careful in that regard. You know, you don't just want to be trying to, you know, sit in your bedroom and trip on your internal chemicals all day. You know, it's like we have to be out in the world as well and such. But yeah, that is all.
What Jonathan's trying to say is get a job, you filthy hippies. Anyway, but yeah, it's like so with regards to that nested shell of nested Matryoshka doll type structure, there's this thing where it's like as you move towards those more inner layers, they're more formless, they're more receptive to experience, they're more sensitive, right? Because as we build those outer layers, we're building them using forms, right? Think about clay, right? Unformed clay. You can take it, you can mold it into things with your hand. Once the clay has been shaped and fired and now it's a vase, you can't just take it and squish it into like the shape of a triangle or something, right? Like as things harden, they become anesthetized, right? All experience is the informing of the formlessness that is pure awareness. Okay. All right. So what that means is that the deeper layers of you, that like inner child aspect that's buried within that matryoshka doll structure, is pure feeling. It's like a radio receiver. It just sees patterns in absolutely everything. And it's possible to get into states of consciousness where that pattern recognition is firing in all cylinders. And that can be a good thing if you can kind of, turn that dial in a controlled way, right? Especially if you're an artist or a musician or a philosopher or any kind of creative person. And, you kind of have to maintain a tether to that inner world that most people lose it. Most people identify with those outer layers of that shell structure, and they have very little direct contact with that inner world. It's usually artistic people who maintain that kind of contact. But there's also a danger there, which is that inner child is extremely egotistical. It literally sees itself as the center of the fucking universe. And it's also characterized by extreme paranoia. This is the deficiency of the magical structure, if you want to put this in Gebser's terms. If you're seeing everything is connected to everything else, well, that's nice and lovely if you're in the Garden of Eden and everything is meaningful and beautiful and it's great and all. But when you're living in a world that you feel to be an other, then something that's going to eat you, right? Well, that's not pleasant at all. You feel like you are in the belly of the beast, right? That's the bottom of the catabolic descent of the hero's journey. And that can be really horrifying. And I think we see something pretty similar in, I think we're going to talk about Levin next, but we see something like that going on in schizophrenia. I think there's this really weird thing where schizophrenia seems to be the deficiency of the perspectival structure, where there's this kind of disassociation from everything, including your own thoughts. But then it does this kind of loop thing where the deficient perspectival structure, which is really, I think that is what schizophrenia is, also looks a lot like the deficiency of the magical structure. And so there's this kind of loop there for whatever reason. But in any case, Michael Levin.
Just a quick,
yeah, go ahead.
So that's thoughts on the dangers of psychedelics is what we were talking about there. And that's kind of the Luciferic as like the new and the novel. And of course, children are like the exemplar of novelty and potential, or in that sense of like, I don't know, I associate the Luciferic and tripping and all that with that youthfulness of kind of malleability and coming closer to that inner child to some extent. The opening, if the Ahrimanic side or Yaldabaoth side is this enclosure, this enframing of putting on the garments of skin, these external barriers to kind of shield the inner child, then the Luciferic and tripping and such is kind of opening that back up to the that youthful kind of interconnectedness with everything, as it were. And of course, some people really need that, right? Some people are stuck in this closed thing and they need gnosis. They need to attain, beyond they need to go through the cave, or, as it were. But for other people, you could be so open that your brains fall out, right? It's that kind of balance that we have to be wary of when messing around with Famicon. That's what I would say. But if you get it right, it can really be this, this kind of, it can open this channel, as it were, this vertical grace, which Tomberg, I think it fits beautifully with that closed circle thing I mentioned earlier. So yeah, I feel like we're getting behind a bit on the questions now. So maybe some brief thoughts on Levin or
yeah, Michael Levin's stuff is very interesting, though he does tend to he does kind of lean into this kind of transhumanist way of thinking about things. He's always been kind of reluctant to declare any allegiance to Sheldrake's ideas about morphogenetic fields, but his alternative is just hot air as far as I'm concerned. Like, okay, well, you don't need to posit that. Well, why? What's your alternative explanation? And then he waxes on about, you know, some sort of computational stuff which is encoded within these relationships between the cells and blah 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 blah. You know, it sounds very technical and computer sciencey, but he's not actually saying anything. He doesn't have an alternative theory to the idea that these morphogenetic fields are actually real. Now, with that said, I think that the experimental research that he's doing is absolutely incredible. And he's you know, I don't want to knock him too hard. I don't think he's fully committed to a kind of physicalist metaphysics, but he's also very reluctant to really flesh out the metaphysical implications of his own work in the way that I would like to see. He's not as he's not as brash as someone like myself or Sheldrake would be.
Yeah.
He's more conservative.
I saw I'm trying to catch up. I'm
Sorry.
No, it's all good. I'm just trying to highlight the questions. That I saw one about the feminine. That's kind of going to be a hard question. I think I've lost it now. Was it right here? Well, now
we just got to keep it going. Just keep it going.
Yeah.
Scroll to the bottom. Let's see what we got.
Sure. Okay, yeah, maybe one from the bottom, then I'll look. What do you see?
I'm looking for question marks.
Thanks for tuning in, y'all. Here we are, live streaming. Hey. Stay tuned after the break. Maybe I could say something while you look for a question. I could just wax a bit about the medium. It's an interesting thing how.
Yakub.
You got something?
No, just,
Okay. It's
we're not talking about Yakub.
I was gonna say it's an interesting thing how dead air is kind of taboo because these mediums evolved out of television and radio, where bad air was a big no-no. It's like you'll lose viewership quickly, and then as we get to phones where you have like minutes and stuff like that, there's an emphasis on avoiding silence, as it were, and the things which occur in the silence. Here we are. It's pretty cool, and it's interesting to think about. That oftentimes conversations that you'll see online are rushed along, as it were. Don't forget to abide. I don't know, just kind of some musings. Let's find another question here. That's all.
Chat's gonna very quickly devolve into Yakub shit posting. We need to course correct very quickly.
Show us some questions, y'all.
Makes sense. His research is great, but his theory is bunk. I wouldn't say his theory is bunk. He just doesn't have a theory. It's like, ask him, right? Like, how is it that these planaria are able to somehow like probabilistically, grow two heads on the basis of this kind of chimeric surgery that he's done on them? Like, where is that information at, right? And he'll say, well, it's somehow contained within these like informational networks within the body of the organism. But what does that mean? What is he talking about? Like, what does that look like? There's nothing there. It's just hot air. Can new archetypes emerge beyond the wheel of pattern, or if they did, would they have always been there and blah, 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 blah? Okay, yeah.
Yes, of course, this is what forms, footnotes, Plato, so Matt's been talking about as well, Tim and such. This is, and yeah.
I think that ultimately one of the major conclusions that I've came to has been that there is these forms are not just these static crystalline objects that are floating around in some kind of eternal hyperspace. They actually are in this kind of communicative relationship with corporeal reality. There is this kind of back and forth there. That's the significance of memory within Sheldrake's theory. It's the significance of memory, I would say, even within Plato's work himself, right? You know, Plato says anamnesis, right? So there's this sense in which these forms are not just these perfect little like Pythagorean geometrical shapes floating around, right? Like there are these, they are fields of relationships. You know, the metaphor that I've been using for a while now has been this notion of composite images, and that's another thing that I owe to Sheldrake, because he uses that exact same analogy within his book on morphic resonance. The theory of formative causation. And what that then implies, what that points towards, is really, I think, the same distinction that Steiner is making when he contrasts living concepts with dead abstractions, right? A dead abstraction is one that is no longer in communication with the real world, right? Whereas a living concept is not static, it's not fixed, right? It's much more like Goethe's Orpflans, right? You get this kind of composite image sort of thing with all these different plant types stitched together in this sort of like Frankenstein image. That, I think, fundamentally is what the archetypes are, what the forms are, and they are kind of generated within this kind of cyclical, recursive. Again, the torus is a great example of this. You know, you get this back and forth between the transcendent and the immanent, which is really a back and forth between the implicate and the explicate, right? You know, that's David Bohm's language, but even David Bohm, he's just deriving that from Giordano Bruno. Giordano Bruno got most of this right, you know, in like the Renaissance, and we've just been playing catch up. But yeah, there's this very real aliveness to this world of forms, world of spirit, whatever you want to call it. It's not just some static mathematical hyperspace.
Which kind of ties into this one here about the feminine, right? Like insofar as you could also the relationship there could also be conceived as masculine and feminine, where like this idea that the spiritual is off somewhere else and not totally non-corporeal, and kind of you know, we encounter the divine feminine insofar as we are in touch with creation and the created world, or like, you know, the manifests and the particular, the multiple, the you know, the dissonant, the embodied, and perhaps how how the eternal feminine leads ever upwards. This is a quote. How would we interpret this quote? I don't know. It reminds me most of that virginal kind of integrity of the open circle, where just as God descends in kind of this loving condescension into the multiple, the feminine kind of unifies and strives upward towards God, or something like that. That's and how do I approach her? That's a whole. I mean, that's a personal question, I suppose, but I don't know. Through our embodied experiences, I think a great way to strengthen your relationship with the divine feminine and such. Just me waxing about the lovely ladies here. Let's see what else we got. Okay, let's go to the bottom. How do you see the integral structure? Like, if the perspectival is spherical, how is the integral toroidal?
The integral, the torus comes in for the integral. I don't like calling it that because Ken Wilber kind of hijacked that terminology. The what I've been calling it is the envisionary structure of consciousness. But in any case, the torus. You know, we see the sphere and the tetrahedron, and especially the star tetrahedron, because of the self-duality of the tetrahedron. These are all implicated within this emergence of perspectival space that we see within the Renaissance, and we see it within the mathematical geometry of space as well. But the Torus then, you see this in embryology, right? You have the blastula, which forms, which is literally like a hollow sphere of shells. And then you have this invagination of the blastula, which creates the toroidal structure of the gastric system for animals, and then even for plants too. It's called the tree of life because a tree is a torus, right? You have the roots, and then it branches out literally. That torus is showing us the relationship, that recursive relationship between the transcendent and the immanent, and that is precisely, I would say, what that envisionary consciousness is, because it is coming to an awareness of really the darkness, which is the chaos, the indeterminacy, the divine feminine within the transcendent, right? So the natural world is understood within traditional philosophy as being this ingression, you could say, of light into darkness, form informing formlessness, so as to give rise to nature. But with this notion of living thought forms as these kind of composite images, where you have this recursive relationship. Well, now you have light within darkness, but then you also have the darkness within light, right? And so it goes both ways. You have the yellow and the blue, and so. That then I think it's all there in the Torus, especially if we interpret the Torus in the way that I've been trying to get at, where you're actually, you have the two trees of life, you have the tree and the roots, and then you can set up the planets, and then it makes this model really that I think shows us the basic structure of human consciousness, which is itself a microcosm of the macrocosm. And this is what Steiner was trying to tell us too, right? That when we look to our own inner worlds, we're doing cosmology, because the human is the encapsulation and a perfect balancing of everything that we see beyond ourselves as well.
Yeah. Good stuff. Someone asked thoughts on following her. Basically asking about the relationship with the anima and stuff. Yeah, I think, it's good to, yes, I encourage people to form a relationship with the divine feminine. I think Mary was an incarnation of this in a sense. And the best way to integrate your anima is in the context of an actual relationship with a woman in physical meat space. So get out your bedrooms, y'all. Yeah. Good stuff. Someone asked if you use many synthesizers. If so, do you have favorites? Presumably that's for you.
So I don't have any physical synthesizers at the moment. I would like to get some at some point, but really all of the music that I make, I just use Ableton's built-in stuff, because I've been using that, like the basic Ableton toolkit, to make music since I was like 15 years old, and I don't really need to blow $3,000 on a Moog in order to make music. So unless I have $3,000 lying around that's just, burning a hole in my wallet, then I'm probably just going to keep using software, because frankly, I'm not a snob when it comes to that kind of thing. Like, if it gets the job done, it gets the damn job done. So synthesizers are cool though. I do like analog synthesizers. I just don't have the money for that.
Looks like there's I don't know how long you want to keep going for. It's up to you. We could probably wrap it up.
Shady, maybe your dreams are telling you that you actually have a craving for donuts. Have you considered that? Maybe you need more donuts in your diet.
the forbidden toroid.
Yeah, like if you've got Ableton Live 11 or 12 or whatever the hell we're on at this point, like you can make anything. Like Ableton is great. I need to get a Mac though, for real. I used to use a Mac for running Ableton, and where this is tech talk. I'm sorry guys if you find this boring, but Macs are so much better than PCs at running music software. It's ridiculous. That MacBook, I still have it. It's literally 12 years old. It's old enough to be in middle school, and that thing still runs Ableton better than my PC. It's crazy, but anyway. New Science of Heaven. Somebody mentioned that. Yeah, that's what's that guy's name? I forgot his name. New Science of Heaven. He's Robert Temple. That's his name. He's the plasma physics guy. Yeah, his stuff's interesting for sure.
Questions? Anyone have questions? Can Ahriman's earthly incarnation be averted? Ooh, we were talking about this for a bit yesterday. Or is it presumably necessary for collective conscious evolution? Do you think it will be a literal person or something more vague and abstract? This is where I'm interjecting, like an AI or something. But, oh, man, yeah, we talked about this a bunch yesterday.
We did, yeah.
It's an interesting thing. Oh my gosh. Well,
oh my gosh.
Maybe some framing for those who don't know. Ahriman is conceived kind of as this mechanical, kind of corporeal, blind, this impulse to, oh my God. I mean, you can articulate better the deep kind of workings of the origins of Ahriman, as it were, like the metaphysical status of Ahriman. But this idea that this kind of mechanical intelligence. I heard a quote, man, not that long ago that was by that the guy in Boston who runs the Anthroposophical Society in Boston. He said he quoted Steiner, where Steiner said, "In the future, humans will carry around these small devices in their pocket with extremely high harmonic intelligence." And I'm like, man, Steiner sometimes he's crazy, but sometimes it's like, wow, yeah, it's like he's right on the nose. But the incarnation of Ahriman, where my head goes is to AI and stuff like this, taking on body gradually. Keelan speaks to this very well. And the necessity of it. Oh my gosh, it's kind of a big topic. Maybe throw in some stuff here.
Yeah, so I was talking about this in relation to this book. I forget what it's called. Was it Cyclonopedia or something like that? It's a theory fiction book that I think is onto something. It's a book. It's technically fiction, but it's written in the style of like a serious, like prosaic theoretical work. So there's this whole genre of theory fiction. If you guys spinal catastrophism is another example of this, if you guys are familiar with that. But the Cyclonopedia, I'm pretty sure I'm saying that word correctly. Either way, it's this theory fiction book about this idea that oil, like petrol, is sentient in some sense, and it has this kind of will where there's this kind of adversarial relationship between oil, which you can think of as this kind of densified liquid darkness. There's this adversarial relationship between the oil and the sun, where the oil is actually facilitating all these wars in the Middle East and facilitating this what we would call like the incarnation of Ahriman, right? The technologization of the planet, the lighting up, the illuminating of the earth with electricity and so on and so forth, because it wants to outshine the sun. And so anyway, it's a fascinating book. There's some good videos on YouTube about it. It's really out there. And of course it's written kind of tongue in cheek. It's kind of fictional, but I think it actually kind of gets at something really interesting. This kind of Ahrimanic impulse that is there within oil, within machine technology, within electrical technology and whatnot. And there is this kind of adversarial relationship between that and the light of the sun.
I remembered some things where so the way that Steiner talked about the incarnation of Ahriman and its necessity was insofar as he thought about humans evolving in this etheric direction, kind of becoming more spiritual, as it were, and somewhat, it's hard to tell whether he meant less corporeal at the same time, which it seems he might have just kind of humans going off into the spiritual and kind of forsaking the corporeal to some extent. It could also maybe be that he meant that there is some sort of stacking where our locus of consciousness is more identified with our etheric body, which is, more interconnected and metatemporal. But it's this idea that he thought that humans, the physical body, would essentially take a back seat in one way or another, and that we would treat it more like a vehicle of sorts that we would get in and out of, like, metaphysically, or however you want to think about it. such that he would talk about the incarnation of Ahriman as essentially our bodies becoming technological and man and machine merging, like we see with Elon and the brain plugs and stuff like that. How Matrix, like and if Yaldabaoth is analogous to Ahriman, it's very much this kind of that kind of myth of the evil creator of the world, like this technological enclosure of enframing that kind of traps you from an experience of the real or something. But so yeah, in that regard, it's kind of, he talked about how Ahriman would have to basically have control of our physical bodies, and he talked about how Ahriman donated the physicality when we were kicked out of the garden because of Lucifer or something. Then Ahriman donated our physical being, which means like over time we developed our physical bodies and such. And so then there is this thing where Ahriman gets to keep the physicality or something, is the way that he kind of mythologically puts it. It's very hard to talk about, but some stuff like that, and how that fits with this overemphasis on the Luciferic or the spiritual, perhaps, this idea that perhaps we are not to move away from the corporeal, and maybe that, this balance must always be struck. There's some vague thoughts. Also relevant to this is Galahad Eridonis's article on his Substack about the black goo and this kind of Plutonic demon of sorts of, which is analogous to what Keelan was saying about oil. And would recommend checking him out on Substack. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot that could be said about it. I think it's a topic of our time, finding a right relationship with Ahriman. I think in that regard, it's kind of inevitable. We see AI coming like this big wave. And if we consider this as the incarnation of Ahriman, if Ahriman is one half of the equation, or Yaldabaoth, and we can conceive it as kind of an essential thing, except you can lean too far in that way. If we see AI as kind of this Ahrimanic intelligence of sorts, to relate with it properly is, I think, what we're being called to do at this time, to not become idolatrous and see it as God, but to relate with it properly is, I think, maybe the necessity of this thinking about the incarnation of Ahriman, that we have to find a right relationship with this aspect of the spiritual world or something like that. Yeah. AI and Ahriman. Yeah, surely more could be said, but that's agricultural.
Yeah, Steiner talks about, he says that Lucifer incarnated like in 3000 BC in China or something like that. As far as I know, he never really elaborates on what the hell he's talking about by that. So I don't know. Good question. Steiner says a whole bunch of stuff that's just like, okay, all right, Steiner.
Oh yes, okay, that's what you're answering.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It seems to me like the incarnation of Lucifer, because I get what he's doing. He's saying, okay, there was the incarnation of Lucifer, and then 3,000 years, and then the incarnation of Christ, and then 3,000 years, and then you get Ahriman. I don't really see that. I think that Lucifer and Ahriman are both incarnating now simultaneously.
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely agree that we're also in an extremely Luciferic time as well. Like we see this in the kind of libertine, licentious emphasis on freedom and individualism and kind of structurelessness, and it does seem that they arise with each other insofar as the way that it can be conceived. If you have Christ as the balanced middle, there is a fall which can occur, which is the fall from the heavenly kingdom into kind of, or however you want to think about it, into the world of duality, where things become split between Lucifer and Ahriman, and we don't see a transcendent unity. We have the mind, Lucifer, the body, Ahriman problem, physicality, and mentality, and or whatever. And then So it seems that whenever you have Ahriman, you also have Lucifer. Or whenever, Yaldabaoth, or however we want to think about it, like, on one sense, we can see the electrification of the earth as this Ahrimanic mechanizing, but at the same time, it's got the light bringer, Lucifer, like, shining. And yeah, it definitely seems like you get these flips, these inversions, and biblically, you could see this in the story of the beast killing the whore, where the whore is Luciferic, licentious freedom, kind of, at one mint, as it were, but then that flips into totalitarian control, this crackdown, where the system of the beast kind of kills the licentious whore time period, as it were. Anytime things get too free, there is this balancing function which happens, and we get these wobbles and such. So yeah, it's some vague amorphous thoughts for you.
Yeah, so in the video, the accelerating spiral of time, the main imagery there was that it's like you have these two, like a galaxy, right? Like you've got these two spirals that are converging on one another. One is Lucifer, one's Ahriman. So you have the black serpent and the white serpent, and it's kind of like the Kundalini and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, what I see, I mean, we definitely see the incarnation of Ahriman, and we can, it seems to be happening in this very methodical way. The 19th century, we created Ahriman's etheric body, right? All the oil fields and the coal mines and the factories, right? The metabolic body, the physiological infrastructure of Ahriman. In the 20th century, we created the sentient body, the electrical nervous system of Ahriman, and now we're creating its mental body with the internet, with AI, and so forth. Now, what seems to be going on here with the Luciferic, though, the incarnation of the Luciferic would be essentially the Matrix, right? It would be this virtual hyperspace of hedonism and escapism, rejection of reality by sinking into this kind of solipsistic fantasy world. If that was incarnated in 3000 BC in China, I have no fucking clue what that would look like, but we're definitely seeing it now, right? I called it the virtual womb in that video.
Yeah, it kind of fits with, insofar as Eastern spirituality is more Luciferic at times, like, attaining enlightenment, kind of forsaking the corporeal, like, but yeah, I don't know. I also see it now 100% now. And, but it's interesting as well that this matrix of sorts, right? The digital womb is at the same time this Luciferic escape, this, just like we were talking about with Plato's cave, escaping to the spiritual somewhere else or something. But it's very Gnostic in that way, in that regard, in a bad way. But it's also this Ahrimanic control in framing. It's like we get this split, this deepening split or something, and maybe there's even kind of a negative synthesis, which of sorts. But like the it's the internet is also this kind of prison of sorts, that keeps you from contact with the real. And I don't mean to get too doomer out here, but yeah, we're reaching a head, people. We have the times we live. Listen here, people. We have to find a right relationship with these demons, is a perhaps way to put it. But because they are ambivalent, we need both of these tendencies, but we have to find a balance and such like that. So the redemption of Lucifer, the redemption of Ahriman.
I think I would say that Lucifer and Satan are separate.
I think Satan corresponds more so with Ahriman, I think, but I don't know. In
another way of looking at it, though, this is what I've kind of been leaning towards, is like, the adversary, let's say.
Like the Ouroboros is kind of the negative synthesis of the two.
Yeah, the negative synthesis of the two. So I don't know if this came from Steiner himself, but I know within anthroposophy, sometimes they refer to that as Soroth. And so that, to me, I would correlate more with Satan. But, sometimes Satan, within Satanism, that's very much Lucifer, essentially, because they see it as this kind of liberator of the individual in this kind of rebellious way. And so there's, yeah. And then there's like the devil, right? You know, this is something people don't talk about enough, but the devil as, you know, is often depicted as not even necessarily a malevolent figure, but as this kind of trickster spirit almost. And that's another thing worth keeping in mind. There is something kind of not even necessarily evil in this like truly malefic way, but there is this kind of tricksteriness to both Lucifer and Ahriman, where it's like, it almost seems like they know the game they're playing sometimes. Like your ego gets too big and you trip yourself up in these really ironic ways. And it's like, oh, well, that's the devil, right? You know, that's how a lot of more folkish ways of thinking about things would put it. So,
yeah. Yeah, and this connects to the whole idea of Leviathan being, I don't know, that if the fallen world or the fall into dualism is kind of a it's this forgetting of, and it goes with sleep as well, where that in Jewish thought also there's kind of this idea of Leviathan or the adversary as basically pets of God in a sense, or like, I guess what I'm speaking to here is this idea of all things having a purpose, where even the adversary, this kind of this antithesis in a sense, was created by God for a reason of sorts, where it's like, do you see what I'm getting at here a little bit, where the tricksterness is like, there is a function that is played by this, this separating, I don't know, maybe I'm biting off more than I can chew here, but
well, that makes me think of the Apocrypha and the book of Judas in particular, like where Jesus is depicted as this almost kind of Diogenes-esque figure. He's constantly laughing. He feels like it kind of feels like the apostles or the 12 disciples. They are you know, they're looking for this deep, somber, stoic spiritual truth, and Jesus is depicted as just kind of laughing at them, because the actual truth, which you know, within that story, it's Judas who's the one who really gets the joke, the cosmic joke. And it's interesting, isn't it, that within the canonical Gospels, you know, Jesus cries, he gets angry, he feels pain and agony. The one thing he never does is he never laughs. And that's an interesting thing, isn't it? So
someone asked if thinking is overrated and gay.
Generally speaking, yeah.
Thoughts on Jung's cabin? I've not oh, you mean like the actual cabin that he lived in Zurich or wherever it was? I don't know. It seemed pretty cool. It seemed like a vibey place. I don't know. It was a little bit like, I don't know. I don't know if that's what you meant. It sounds like it might have been a book or something. But what would you say is the self's relationship to the unconscious, and how does free will or agency or whatever you want to call it factor into that? Oh my gosh, man, these questions.
Yeah,
I don't know how much I got more in me here. Maybe this will be our last one.
Yeah. Let's see if we can tackle this one, and then we're at the 2-hour mark. So,
it's kind of what we were just saying in a sense, like, or what I was trying to articulate, where the self can be kind of conceived of as God of sorts, and like the unconscious is kind of this multiplicity, the world of potential, which we can kind of, or which is perhaps in this kind of opponent processing, maybe even a marital relationship, you know, between heaven and earth, and that the fallen world of the so-called fallen world actually has a function, such that we cannot demonize the unconscious and try to eradicate it, right? You know, we have to have a productive relationship with it, a generative relationship with the potential space. These are some thoughts coming to mind.
So the way that Carl Jung conceptualized the capital S self, the higher self, he conceptualized it in this very type 1 sort of way, as this kind of ideal, as a kind of center of gravity, as it were, much like the sun, right, around which things orbit. And he's not wrong about that. That's definitely an aspect of it. But the way that I've been trying to think of this is that subjectivity. Okay. And by subjectivity, I don't mean awareness or consciousness in this much more general sense, but subjectivity specifically in the sense of there being a sense of boundedness, which separates an internal world from an external one. This is, as Fichte shows us, that's the I am, right? That's the self-conceptual loop of that feeling of I-ness. It splits awareness. It crucifies being, in a sense. Heidegger has a very similar way of putting it when he talks about this in his contributions to the philosophy of the event, one of his later writings. But in any case, you have this split then between the formlessness of pure awareness itself and then the concept of the I, which is simply the concept of unity itself, right? And then you have the bodily realm, and then you have spirit, thought, right? And you get this kind of fourfold split that happens, which again, there's this meeting of the quadratic and the triadic within there that you see in the 12-fold structure of the zodiac and the astrochromogram. You also see that meeting of the triadic and the quadratic within the structure of the tetrahedron, etc. It's all there anyway. And so there is this sense in which that pure form of unity is the archetypal self, the archetypal I, as it were, but it's not the whole thing. There's also that formless abyss of subjectivity as well, which is also implicated within that. And so there's this multifacetedness to the self, right? That contains it contains the structure of the entire universe, I would say. But in any case, with regards to freedom and agency, this is where I think that this kind of philosophy has to be able to move beyond Aristotelian conception of formlessness and indeterminacy, and by extension corporeality, as this kind of fallenness or impurity or contamination, and rather see redemption not as a dematerialization and a kind of slipping off into some idyllic world, the escape from the other, the mother, right? But rather as this harmonization, which includes chaos, which includes dissonance, which includes all of the baggage and trauma and scars of the bodily world, that there's this redemption of that, this sublimation of pain into tragic beauty that ultimately gives us the intensity of numinosity, which is what reality is moving towards.
That's what it's all about in the end.
That's the whole game, baby. Yeah. And what else was I going to say? I had something else with freedom. Yeah, that was the next thing. Is that freedom really then becomes about the degree to which these different things in orbit around that nucleus, that center of gravity, are brought into harmony with one another. And the way that the Platonists and Neoplatonists thought of this is useful here. I mean, the way they saw it is like, if you're being dragged around by the impulses and instincts of the body, that's being a slave to your passions. That's the way they would have seen it. But bringing those things into accordance with this kind of higher unity implicated by the I, the form of formlessness, the form of formedness, the monad, that's where the real freedom is, because then everything is brought into alignment with this inner will, which is ultimately simply the affirmation of the experience of being, of becoming, right? And really, that's, once you peel back the layers, I think that's exactly what we find underneath Nietzsche's notion of the will to power as well, right? Once you peel it back enough, and Essential Salts, I think he's been kind of spiraling in on this as well, especially with his readings of Heidegger's Nietzsche lectures, that you peel back the layers enough, and the will to power, this will to life affirmation has this very Christic type of thing going on to it, which is a bit ironic considering how vehemently anti-Christian Nietzsche could be at times. I would still say that when all said and done, he is probably the most agonizingly Christian philosopher of them all. So yeah, there you go. There's my take on that, I suppose.
Yeah, cool. All right. I did have something up. Let me see if I can remember it. Oh yeah, there's an interesting flip where also, something about how the self is also in the unconscious to some extent, right? Like, well, you can flip it where it'd be like the ego is the potential is like the feminine in relation to the masculine self abiding in the unconscious, like the spiritual world being the unconscious. But generally speaking, yeah, I think that the idea of God hovering above the waters, like this is the, it's just the kind of verticality of it can be weird. But yeah, what Keelan just said, I agree with all that. I think we'll maybe wrap it here. There's a couple more questions came in. Any thoughts on?
Yeah, we'll probably need to wrap it up. There's a question about Whitehead here and negative prehension. This is really a topic. If you really want to get into Whitehead, we actually have a Whitehead reading group on the Discord server right now. We've not gotten that far into process and reality, but we've been doing that. And this is a topic that we actually addressed pretty recently. So the reason why Whitehead's bringing in this idea of negative prehensions is because for Whitehead, prehension is feeling and feeling is relationality, which means that the being of any entity, any actual entity at all, is characterized by its relationships to every single other entity in the universe, full stop. What that means then is that Whitehead has to bring in this notion of negative prehensions there in order to account for the fact that our consciousness is not literally populated by a complete just cavalcade of just an awareness of literally everything in the universe all at once. There has to be this kind of filtering that happens. And I think ultimately I agree with Whitehead here that is kind of what's going on, but it also points towards this kind of deeper thing about what exactly the difference between conceptual prehension and physical prehension is. Because the way that Whitehead initially frames this is a duality of potentiality and actuality, which is really a kind of inversion of the Aristotelian distinction between potentiality and actuality. Aristotle saw the forms, right, the eternal objects, as pure actuality, and the cora, the prima materia, as pure potentiality. Whitehead's essentially flipping that upside down, and it gets complicated. It gets complicated because then it doesn't really work, in my opinion. Ultimately, I think you have to conceptualize, well, the conceptual, the world of forms or thought forms or whatever you want to call it, that as both actuality and potentiality, and the corporeal, the physical, as actuality and potentiality. And so it's complicated. Let's put it that way. But that's the gist of it. For him, negative prehension is just this kind of filtering. But then it's like, okay, well, why exactly is my mind filtering out, whatever the, sunspots that are occurring on the sun right now, but it's not filtering out this microphone in my hands, right? Like there seems to be this kind of order to that, that he doesn't really elaborate upon until part 4 of the book, where he talks about the extensive continuum, which is his attempt at really reconceptualizing space-time in this way that is, in a sense, his response to Einstein. If that made any sense at all, then good, I guess. If it didn't, I'm sorry, but that's the best I can do right now. Ask Matthew Segal. He's better at this than I am. Yeah.
Cool. Maybe I'll do some wrapping thoughts. Like, maybe try and tie it together with a nice little big picture bow, as it were, where this creative agency, which occurs at the boundary, because true creativity and musicality, Genesis, creative generativity, right? Like in Genesis, and we just talk about generative marriages and such like that. This creativity is kind of abiding in that in between, that metaxu tension, as it were, like the conjunction of opposites between the heavenly, the unity, and the multiplicity of the many. And yeah, finding this relationship with the corporeal is, I think, a big thing in our time, such that the divine feminine, all this stuff that we've been talking about and how it fits well with Christianity and all that, even going back to the age of Aquarius, where Aquarius goes with the Grail and the divine feminine, at least through the star card, and also the internalization of thinking and such, or in this way, basically just bringing it back towards this idea that we have to stand at the balance, between the so-called fallen, so-called evil corporeal suffering and such, and the heavenly ruminations of sorts. Basically what I'm trying to say is, don't forget to go outside and touch grass, folks. Meet up with your friends in person, go on a road trip perhaps. That's kind of and if you want inspiration in this regard, check out estuaryroadtrip.com.
Grab life by the horns. Do the thing. Eat the donuts. Flirt with the cashier at Walgreens. You got this. Live your life, buddies. Okay, we're done with this. Take it easy, guys. Thank you for hanging out. Blah blah blah. Bye.